Today is Monday, November 15th, 2021. This is the Utah League of Cities and Towns Board of Directors meeting, and welcome to all of you joining us here in person and those of you joining us online. We appreciate your time and your willingness to be with us and engage in this important work today. Now, we would like to welcome Ben Hart. Ben Hart is here with us from the Utah Office of Economic Opportunity. And Ben, thank you for being our guest today and for coming to visit with us. We're going to open with number 2 is some administrative items. The minutes have been sent out. We have the minutes sent out. If you've had an opportunity to review the minutes from our October 18th, 2021 meeting and our September 29th, 2021. Well, yeah, September 29th, 2021 meeting. If you've looked over those, any questions or concerns, changes to bring up?
We did have a change with the wrong city for Councilmember Egbert on the September 29th, so we'll be changing that.
Mapleton City. Yes.
Yes.
Well, it depends on the day. We'll go with Mapleton mostly.
Great, thank you for that. Any other amendments or questions? Okay, seeing none, is there a motion to approve the minutes from our October 18th and our September 29th?
Jeff Silvestrini, I'll move to approve the minutes with the change noted.
Thank you, Mayor Silvestrini.
The greatest city in.
Yeah.
Oh, wait.
Thank you, White.
Got Julia.
What's day to day?
I'll second. All right, we have a motion by Mayor Silvestrini and a second. Who's taking notes? You're keeping track of this.
Yep.
Okay, so you have that Carrie Malkovich made the second. Great.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Any additional discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of approving the minutes from October 18th and September 29th, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, those minutes are approved. Thank you. All right, our board and commissions report appointments. Justin, where's Justin? Where is he? Right here. Okay, Justin, we're going to turn it over to you.
What am I even talking about here? So we really don't actually have anything to talk about this month, which is a good thing. We will have something we'll need to look at starting next month with some changeover in elections with changeover boards, but nothing we actually have to consider this month. So stay tuned on that one.
Okay.
Like, I didn't think I had anything, and I don't.
Well, the final canvas of votes is tomorrow,
That's
so
right.
we'll have some clarity after tomorrow.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. All right, moving right along. Item 4, fiscal year 2022, quarter 1 financial report and check register. Nick Jarvis, I'm going to turn it to you.
Excellent. You can see in your packet, we have what we're calling the Q1 plus financial report. The reason we do it this way is because we have our annual convention in September, and then a lot of the follow-up of paying those bills and everything and getting all the revenue in happens at the beginning of October. So this gives you a snapshot of what it looks like what our year looks like post annual. It's technically a third, so I was thinking, should it be a T1 or something like that? But Q1 plus is what works for us. Overall, we've collected 80% of all of our revenue, including 98.5% of our dues, which is a little bit ahead of schedule for this time. So we're looking good there. Sponsor and donation, you can see what we've collected there is what we've had to push forward from last year. If you remember from our audit from last year of how we're supposed to recognize our sponsor revenue, because our sponsorships are for the calendar year, but we have to recognize it in the fiscal year. In January is when we will send out the new sponsorship agreements, and then we'll see that come up there as well. Registration fees are looking exactly where we thought they would be for having done an in-person annual. And exhibit space was high compared to in years past because we had additional space for annual with normally, if you remember at the Sheraton, we're lining the halls and can't really fit as many there. We'll also have our largest exhibiting event is mid-year, so we will also have that to contend. So we expect to be over 100% there. Grants and special project revenue, we budgeted $15,000 in luau stuff, but we have not collected any of that yet, but we've collected on our ARPA assessments. If you remember when we approved the budget last time around, we did not include that. So this is unbudgeted, but into special grants and special project revenue. So we're at 1,135% of what we budgeted there. We'll note a couple times in this memo that we will be bringing forward a budget amendment to the board to recognize that revenue, and with the deputy director position likely alter some of the personnel. But we have collected 203,000 in that ARPA assessment, and that will help fund the position that Liam is filling for the next 2 years. Spending, we've spent 34% of what we budgeted so far. Everything is in line with what we have projected. Not a ton of expenses coming in this first quarter. One thing we do want to note is the organization modernization. We have spent a little over $20,000 there in order to update our bill tracking software and get that ready for the legislative session coming up here. Justin and Carson and Molly were working on that, and it looks like it'll be really good stuff for everyone to follow. So better than what we had last year. So overall, things are looking really good. Didn't see any major variation in trends from previous years of when we're collecting stuff, and the finances are in good shape. So I'm happy to answer any questions on this report specifically. You can see the numbers here as well. And then we also have our Q1 plus July through October check register. This is a unwieldy document, but we do want to bring it forward to the board because that is one of the suggestions from the legislative state auditor that the boards do approve check registers. And I have the checks right here.
I have one question. Being new, I mean, I noticed there was a large monthly payment to Utah State Treasurer.
So
What's that one for? I don't.
this shows up, this is our own money. So this is a transfer over to the PTO.
Okay.
But it does show up
So that's-
as a check, but it's not an actual expense.
That's what I wanted.
I have a question, Nick. We said 98.5% have collected on our membership dues. Have we had any pushback from that flat fee of the 500?
We did have one town that I believe we.
So, Nick, can I answer that question?
Yep, go for it.
Yeah, we have had a little bit of pushback. So as of now, Lindell Town is the only town that has told us that they don't plan to pay. I've also met with Virgin Town and exchanged emails with Leamington Town, both of whom were concerned about the $500. In my conversations with Virgin, I personally have spent a lot of time with Virgin Town on referendum issues and other things. In fact, we often do a special training just for the Zion Canyon communities in the spring. And as I talked through with them, the value that they've been receiving for essentially a $50 contribution to the league, I think we got to an okay place in Virgin. With Leamington and Lindell, what it highlighted to me was the need for us to do some sort of regional event in that part of the state, because it's been a while. Normally we are doing our regional events in the spring, and because of COVID in 2020 we didn't do it, and then in 2021 we didn't do any regional events either. So I think part of it is there's been some turnover, some of the longstanding people are gone, and so it caught a few people off guard. I do want to thank Mayor Castleton, because for those of you who are new on the board, last year, Mayor Castleton, along with Mayor Silvestrini, Mayor Niehaus, and you, and Mayor Wilson Edwards, were part of a subcommittee that looked at varying options to create some sort of minimum for towns. It's pretty common in state leagues around the country, which is why we were looking at it. And it was in part with Dave Church's departure, recognizing we're going to need to pay more for the services that a lot of our smaller communities need. And so we're trying to get to that fairness. And Mayor Castleton personally met with dozens of communities off the Wasatch Front. So I think we still have a little more due diligence to do. Lindell is the only town right now that has said they're not paying this year. The others have expressed concern about it, but they have not said for sure they're not paying, and we're still following up. Nick, I know Abby, our operations coordinator, left for another opportunity a couple of weeks ago. Well, Nick and I have still been tracking who's paid and who hasn't paid. Nick, is there anything else you want to add on that front?
From what I recall, last time we shared those who hadn't paid with folks, and there was one larger one in there, North Ogden, I believe, and we did receive that. So we still do have a handful, mostly smaller towns, and those, not necessarily those, those $500 communities, but there are a handful of those still outstanding, but the big stuff has been coming.
So basically, we're saying that for those that are the towns have a minimum of 500. We just need to come up with ways that we can show an ROI and a benefit to them on their local level, rather than just statewide events. All right.
Which we intend to do with the visits that we're starting. Actually, we're starting soon in Davis County, but we're going to be scheduling throughout the spring, these regional visits around the state.
Was it West Valley that we didn't have yet? Is there any update on that?
There is a vocal this morning on West Valley. So the term, for those who were on the board last year, there was one city that did not belong to the league. That was West Valley City. I met with West Valley City's senior staff a couple of times over the course of the year to talk about their concerns and why they had decided not to participate. The previous 3 years, we'd had 100% participation. That was the first time that had happened in many years. The term of art I've been using all fall has been cautiously optimistic. And I was told this morning by one of their senior staff that he thought that they would indeed join, and he was going to confirm that this week. So again, cautiously optimistic. Hopefully that'll work out. It's been a really good conversation with them. Several cities, in addition to me, have reached out to West Valley City leadership and talked to both electeds and staff. They said that their biggest policy issues where they felt like there was a disconnect between the city and the league were on homelessness issues, economic development issues, and a couple of others. And the good news is I could point to homelessness and economic development, say, here's all the work that's happening in these two spaces, and we need West Valley's voice at the table. And they agreed. So again, cautiously optimistic. Hopefully by the December board meeting, we'll be able to say we're there. To Nick's point about the budgeted revenues, we did not budget for West Valley. So if they come in, that'll be above budget, which actually fits into our plan for the deputy director position. So we're waiting to even start interviews on that until we have the confirmation on West Valley.
Can I just add to that? Oh, sorry, Mayor, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, it was really interesting. I'm glad that you're to the point where you're at, because this conversation came to my desk about 8 months ago saying, Mayor, what do you think of this other idea of jumping out of the league and us big cities partnering up and focusing more on our needs? And we weren't interested. In fact, as a sister city was ready to jump, we did a lot of outreach and said, just hang in there with us, hang in there. And so again, the component was West Valley, because they were out and they were trying to get others to jump out with them. And I was really pleased to hear that some of my friends that I met with had opted not to jump out. So it's good to know that you're close to getting them back in.
Well, thank you for the outreach that you were doing behind the scenes. I've talked to league directors around the country about how they handle membership organizations, period, but sometimes the conflict that occurs between big cities and other cities. And in some cases, like in the case of the North Carolina League, it almost devastated their league. Their league nearly fell apart because the big cities actually pulled out, formed their own organization. And the new director that was hired has basically spent his whole time trying to bring them back in so there was a unified voice. And it's really hurt them legislatively to have two different groups.
And that was the messaging we sent too, right? Look at all the work, years of work and groundwork you've laid, the league's laid. And now we're going to jump out and try, and we're way behind the 8 ball. We'll never, it just didn't make sense for Provo.
Yeah, well, thank you. Very nice.
Well, so I was just going to say, Cameron, first of all, if you need any assistance in talking to West Valley or any other city, if we want to find of anybody that I think that might be effective, and I think a lot of us may have connections with Mayor-elect Lang, and that so it's different, same city manager, but different political leadership there.
And keeping in mind, they have a unique form of government that the rest of us don't have anymore. They're a strong manager form. So that is unique, but the mayor certainly has some influence, and
Yeah, I think that
coming in new is
that
just
may make a
fantastic. Yeah.
difference. So, now, the other thing I was going to say is, we had a pretty healthy conversation during the nominating committee, actually, for board members about going out into various other communities with legal officers going out and talking about the benefits of the league. So I know that you're organizing that. Just let me know, how I can help with that, because I think I committed to go out to Uinta County, so I'm gonna do that.
Perfect.
All right.
Perfect. Well,
You're gonna bike your way out there, Mayor?
You know, that would be awesome if I could do that.
Well, Mayor Ramsey, can I just add one other piece of this puzzle? First, thank you for the support of the league, of the people in this room and on the call. Whenever you have a transition of leadership, which we're seeing across the state, it's an opportunity to explain the value of the league and to help people who don't know the difference between the Utah League of Cities and Towns and the National Football League to then understand, like, oh, this is important. Like, yesterday I was a member of the public, now I'm in City Hall, and it's important. The conversations that I've had with West Valley have been very enlightening to help understand where some of our blind spots may be and where we can improve. Part of the reason we created our caucus system within the organization was to elevate the voices of different sizes of cities. And so one of the thoughts that we've had there this coming year is to actually potentially do some elected leadership into those caucuses so that there's an opportunity to elevate it even further and have those conversations year round. Mayor Ramsey and I have talked about doing that with the Women in Local Government Caucus and taking advantage of some of the momentum there. So I see it as an opportunity when there are cities that say, hey, you know, we want to talk about the vision of the league. To me, that's great, because that means they're thinking about it and they want to be part of the solution. So as you are talking to cities in your regions, let's make sure we're having that collaborative approach. I think this is also a good time to point out that we too will be having a major transition within the board because come January, we knew that Mayor Arby and Mayor Niehaus and Mayor Castleton would be leaving the board, but likewise, Mayor Buhman, Councilmember Clint Smith, and Mayor Wilson Edwards will be leaving the board as well. Nick, am I missing anybody else?
Oh,
Yeah, Councilmember Smith, Mayor Wilson Edwards, and Mayor Buhman. So we'll have.
Castleton, we do.
Yeah, so really a third of the board will be different from today to January just because of the turnover. So always an opportunity to do things better, look at things with a fresh perspective, and make sure we're that unified voice for cities at the Capitol and beyond.
I think it's important too to note that there were some organized, I can't think of the word, but organized efforts to have those that were running as candidates to be anti-league.
Mhm.
And so I don't know how many of those people were elected, but that voice might be present in every city's new budget cycle, which is now going to be starting after the beginning of the year. And so hopefully that we've gotten to a place where the mayors and a lot of little towns don't have city managers. And so it is the council that decides on if they join the league.
Yep, that is a great point. And I know what you're referencing because I had multiple candidates reach out to me and say, hey, did you hear about this and hear about that?
I had people call me and they say, what does the league do for small cities?
Mhm.
And so we were able to have a lot of discussions about what the benefits of joining the league. And so some of the rhetoric that was put out there that said, no, they're not representing small cities, we were able to kind of debunk and be able to show where the voice is heard, whether it's for the large city, medium city, the small city, the rural, the Wasatch Front, and all the efforts that are put in by the league as a whole really are a benefit.
Yes, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, this is Mayor Niehaus chiming in on that. Do we have somebody that is a board member specifically for towns?
We do.
Yes, we do.
Okay, who's our townie?
Right now it is Mayor Castleton, who we're finding, so we need to find a replacement for that representative for towns, and we'll need that by January. We'll bring that in December.
And Mayor Niehaus, and this goes for the whole board, but and we've been working with Mayor Castleton to look for recommendations. I have some town leaders who I have in mind, but if people have a recommendation of who a strong voice would be to be the town rep on the board, please let us know so we can coordinate with Mayor Silvestrini and be able to bring that name to you in December.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.
Am I on here now? My voice?
Yes.
Oh, good. Finally, I got it going. Hey, I emailed everybody in the 6-county organization again a couple of days ago and asked them, all of the mayors, reminded them how important it is to have a good, strong league to represent the towns and cities around the state. So I hope they'll I gave them Nick's email address, so I hope somebody will get in touch with you.
Perfect. Thank you, Mayor
Thank you.
Caston. And thank you for your service and your advocacy and your strong support of the league. And likewise, Mayor Bierman, Mayor Niehaus, and Mayor Wilson Edwards. Should say Mayor Wilson Edwards. I talked on Friday. She's on vacation this week. First family vacation in a long time. Well deserved after a tough election. So she has to be excused from the meeting, but she will be here for her final meeting in December.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you. Thank you, Mayor Castleton, for that. Okay, let's move on. Unless there's anything else. Anything
We'll
else
just
there?
need a motion on the Q1 plus report and check register.
Okay. It's been sent out. We've gone through it. Mayor Daines,
Were you ready for a motion?
I'm ready for a motion.
I move approval of the Q1 financial report and check register.
Thank you. We have a motion by Mayor Daines. Is there a second? Second. Thank you so much. All right, Gary, thank you. All right, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, all in favor of approving the financial report and the check register from Q1 plus fiscal year 2022, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Thank you for that. And Nick, as always, thank you. All right, item 5 on our agenda, advocacy, engagement, and outreach update. We're going to turn to Cameron, our fearless leader who works 24/7, who I hope someday we can talk into taking a day off. But we appreciate so much all that Cameron does, and we're going to turn it over to him and have him update us on where things are at.
Perfect. And then I'll take the opportunity in a moment to introduce our guest today and looking forward to the discussion. And Ben, thank you for taking the time to join us. As we've discussed here at the board over the last 3 meetings, the Unified Economic Opportunity Commission has been meeting aggressively over the last few months, working on a variety of proposals on economic development and economic opportunity in the state. When we met with the board, a couple of board meetings, or I guess the last board meeting, we told you that Justin and I were going to be meeting with Speaker Wilson and Representative Schultz to talk about the 50-50 formula for the 1% local option. Molly Wheeler, our new policy director, hit the ground running after she was hired the week of the league conference. And then the following week, we dumped a whole bunch of tax-related data on her desk and said, please analyze this and help get us ready for this meeting with the speaker and Representative Schultz. She delivered in spades. And then Justin and I actually spent almost 2 hours with those two legislators. And to put that in context, they normally schedule their days in 15-minute increments. So the fact that we were there for almost 2 hours gives you a sense of how that conversation went. We went back and forth about the impact of the 50-50 formula and tested the hypothesis of if you change the 50-50 formula, would that result in more housing? And who would that impact positively and negatively? Justin used a line, in fact, I'll let you use your line, your quick analysis.
A quick analysis, yeah. 50-50 is not off the table, but it has moved very far over to the edge.
Yeah. So it's still very much there, but we were successfully able to point out that making changes to the 50-50 was going to have all these negative consequences and wouldn't necessarily get to the outcome that they were seeking. That was Gary.
Can you mention, to me, there's one really important data point that if you could highlight for everybody again, that has to do with who's generating the affordable housing versus who the 50-50 impacts.
Sure.
Could you just point that out?
Molly, I'll put you on the spot because you
Yeah.
were the one who put that.
Sure,
message
so,
in.
and I think there's another thing that's also worth looking at, which is the Schedule J levies. So because of the rise of e-commerce and how we're all buying things directly to our homes, that changes where the point of sale is occurring. So inherently, point of sale is already trending towards population based to begin with. And then to Gary's point, a lot of our top housing cities are also our top beneficiaries from the 50-50, especially with multifamily housing. So I looked at the top permitting cities for single family, multifamily, and retail, and just about, I think, I'm forgetting the absolute number, but it's about $46 million would move away from the top housing cities a year if there was to be a change from 50/50.
To me, that was, both of those data points were really important in helping explain what the outcome might be. So I really appreciate that, the work that was put into that, and I'm glad we have that we can share.
So the second, oh, go ahead, Councilor.
So if you said that it's with online sales, it's already moving towards more population based, then we're wanting to keep 50/50 just for that very thing that you just said. But besides maybe some of those in the legislature are advocating for population based only? I received some notification that there are other groups that are heavily pushing this in outside industry. And someone came to our city council wanting us to advocate for population based only. And so I just wanted to know, they didn't say who they were representing, but they came to our council meeting, and I just wanted to know who else is maybe going on the opposite direction of where we're going.
There are a couple of groups out there that have long advocated for changing the 50/50 formula. Ultimately, as we try to read the political tea leaves, there are, what we've tried to do this summer is make a policy-based approach to it rather than just the political. Now, Justin and I earlier that day met with Governor's Office of Planning and Budget, laid out the same data for them and showed them the legal resolution that says, we were opposed to any changes to the 50/50 unless it basically meets this criteria and recognizes the impact on all the cities, et cetera, et cetera. But we've tried to take this policy-based approach to say, what is it that you're trying to accomplish by changing the 50/50, and does changing the 50/50 actually get you there? And then who are the casualties of the collateral damage changing? Because at the end of the day, if there's no new money, all you're doing is moving money from X city to Y city, and you're not enlarging the pot, and you're leaving negative consequences on certain classifications of cities, particularly your commercial centers, your tourism centers, et cetera, et cetera. So at the end of our meeting with the speaker and with Representative Schultz, the speaker said he wanted to try to get the focus back to which cities were planning for a variety of housing. He said, if we don't look at the 50/50, he said, you haven't totally convinced me, but this data is really interesting. I see some of the points. I disagree with others. Go ahead, Justin.
Well, Gavin, if I can quote him maybe directly and excuse the language in this one, but he said, damn it, you might be right. Was what he actually said when we were talking about 50/50.
But then he said, if it's not that, then what? And what can we do to better facilitate smart growth and good planning and integration of planning between the state and local leaders? That was the challenge back to us. Like, okay, maybe you convinced me, but we still have this problem we need to address. And he said, oh, what I don't want, and actually, Mayor Shepherd, I'm going to use your city's example. He said, what I don't want is something that negatively impacts Clearfield, because Clearfield is doing X, Y, and Z. He said, but if there are cities that are not doing X, Y, and Z, how do we identify them and encourage them, or in some cases penalize them for not doing their part? So that was really where the conversation ended, which I will quickly pivot here to the SB 34 plus concept that we presented in concept form to the LPC last month. We presented this to the UEOC last week, and we're presenting it to the Commission on Housing Affordability tomorrow. And the underlying premise of SB 34 plus is to build on the work that cities have been doing for the last few years at planning for a variety of housing types, planning for moderate income housing, recognizing cities plan for housing but don't build housing, and saying right now SB 34 is tied to eligibility for state transportation dollars. But should it also be tied to, for example, state ARPA dollars if there's a local match part 2? And we'll get to the ARPA piece later in the meeting. But there are multiple legislators who really like the idea of saying if there's going to be a local match part 2, then there should be a housing component for eligibility purposes, and SB 34 plus would fit perfectly there. Likewise, part of the UEOC focus has been on integrating housing and economic development and economic opportunity. So one of the concepts we've been discussing with the UEOC has been cities being able to create economic opportunity zones that would, and I'm looking at Ben to make sure I get the language right here, but would be essentially pre-approved as great development opportunities. Well, one of the criteria there could be a housing component, and we suggested that's where SB 34 plus would fit. Because now you would have the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity and the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget essentially saying, yes, Cameron City is doing A, B, and C to plan for housing, so they should get priority in how we're allocating state resources. The other piece to SB 34 plus that we had floated is to say that if City X is doing, or if Cameron City is doing A, B, C, D, and E, and Justin City is just doing A and B, that Justin City would get some sort of prioritization there too, because they're going above and beyond just the minimum requirement of SB 34 plus. So we presented that concept to the UEOC last week. They did not take a vote on that piece, but there were some positive comments. And again, we're presenting it to the Commission on Housing Affordability tomorrow, and we'll walk through it again at LPC later today in more detail. The last piece of, I see Mayor Niehaus waving, so Mayor Niehaus.
Just real quick, so since 4th, 5th, and 6th don't have to report for SB 34, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Yeah, that's an excellent point.
I don't want to be left out.
That's right. One, and what we have discussed internally, and this is part of what we need to work through, is that there may be points that are available only to an SB 34 city. And SB 34 cities are compared against each other, but not against the cities that don't have to comply with SB 34. Does that make sense? And so Moab is one that doesn't have to comply with SB 34, but Mill Creek and Bountiful are. So Mill Creek and Bountiful would have access to those points competing against each other, but you would give automatic credit to the rural communities or something comparable so that a Moab or a Richfield or a Eureka is not disadvantaged. So those are part of the pieces we need to work through, but that's a very real issue, Mayor Niehaus.
So that 50-50 back to that then,
I think I'm.
and that impact that 4th, 5th, and 6th have,
Maybe I'll read to you.
I guess, how do we balance that?
50-50 is what we're trying not to have to balance.
Right.
We're trying to get away from the 50-50 discussion and work on just the retail. and
Right, but with those outside entities coming to the smaller cities, I mean, I feel like they came to our city because we are, a smaller class city. And coming to say, you need to fight for population instead of for the 50-50,
Right.
to keeping 50-50. So that's why I wasn't sure. When I asked them who they were representing, they said just ourselves, but it didn't make sense to me. And so that's why I was wondering who would be targeting smaller cities to go away from keeping the 50-50.
Well, again, I know of a couple of organizations who in the past who have advocated at the Capitol to change 50-50.
Right.
And we've always pushed back on those organizations. So it doesn't surprise me that they would be going directly to the membership to try to make that change.
Okay, and maybe because we are thinking of having some economic development, then
Right.
maybe that's part of that whole plan to debunk
Right.
other things on the local level.
Well, and coming back to the value for small communities, one proposal we made to the UEOC last week, which was met with almost roaring approval, really, was technical assistance for small communities, both to comply with SB 34, but other types of land use technical assistance. So we've heard repeatedly from communities across the state, even from our medium and larger cities, the need for additional technical assistance to be able to put these plans into action. So we've made the case to the governor's office to try to get that into the governor's base budget. And we've made the case to legislative leadership that this would be a very valuable use of state dollars, again, trying to get this integrated effort together. And the UEOC passed a motion last week that Mayor Ramsey actually made to task GOPB with working on that technical assistance proposal in consultation with the League, UAC, and others.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
Any other high-level questions about the UEOC before I introduce Ben?
Ken, this is Mayor Harvey. So it seems like if I remember from SB 34, there were a whole bunch of items on there, and some of them were crafted specifically towards some city so that they could get acceptance. It doesn't, if we're looking at that, I think we need to look at those criteria again. just so in fairness, that all of us cities that are doing our best and aren't participating in some of those items that are 21, 22, 23 on the list. I just hate to see those get weighted and us lose out because we're not participating in those kind of specific types of things that some cities had written into the legislation.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Mayor Harvey. We partnered with the Gardner Policy Institute to analyze all 23 menu items to see which ones were being used and how they're being used. And one of the shortcomings, I think, with SB 34 was that the reporting requirement is not all that helpful. We've met with planners across the state who have expressed frustration with the reporting requirements, not really helping policymakers understand what's working and what's not working. So part of our ask is also to change the reporting requirement. And then Mayor Harvey, as we've gone menu item by menu item, the current draft of SB 34 plus actually contemplates consolidating some of the menu items. So right now, I think the number is down to 20. So we'd be removing some of the menu items that really don't have much bang for the buck, or we're being redundant with other menu items. So trying to tighten them down, but still within the same overall framework. Any other questions? Mayor Ramsey, anything you want to add about the UAOC in general before we turn it over to Ben?
One thing that I'm kind of excited about that we did have unanimous support for is something that we've been talking about for as long as I've been here. And that's the need for messaging, a statewide messaging campaign to help people understand the realities of the growth that is happening and where the growth is coming from. That 3/4 of it, give or take, are our own children and grandchildren, that we can't stop the growth. Our kids are going to keep growing up. They're going to keep having children. They do need somewhere to live. We can't stop the growth that's coming to Utah, so we must plan for it. So it doesn't, it doesn't have to ruin our quality of life that we have here in Utah. And we've got a lot of good people working to make sure that's the case. We've talked for such a long time about a need for a state-led messaging campaign, and that was unanimously supported at the UEOC meeting, this last one that we had. And the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget is going to head that up. They're going to use Envision Utah as a consultant or a partner with that. There will be a lot of collective work, but it is really good news that the state is going to take the lead on a messaging campaign, just an informational and listening as well. Listening, what do residents of the state of Utah want? What is it? How do you want to see us grow? Because we're going to grow. What do you want that to look like? Anyway, that was also big news that came out of us. I'm very happy about that.
One of the things we had in Utah County was that recently was the Growth and Prosperity Conference for the whole county, and Envision Utah did Valley Visioning for our county. And we're thinking about, they have this big vision for the whole valley, but then how does every city integrate into that vision? And I think that's what you're talking about is how do we see this overall plan, but then as a local municipality, actually fit into that plan in growth and in prosperity.
Yeah, it's going to be good. I think it's going to be good. And we know across the state, we had a lot of candidates run for local office this year who ran on, every year we have people who run on no growth, and if this is what you want, don't vote for me because I'm not putting that in, kind of thing. And
some won.
And some won.
Yeah.
And so we understand that there's going to be a lot of information that needs to be shared and some education. We all come into this with needing some education and going, okay, what did I just commit to, and we have an opportunity really as a league and as the members of the board to help provide some training for some of these new elected officials and try to do what we can to help cities recognize some of the needs we have as an entire state and what we can do as communities to help while also building and growing the way we want. Each community has their own, vision for what they want to be, but we have to recognize maybe more than ever before that fits into a larger ecosystem and that we all have a role to play, So anyway, the messaging from the state makes me excited. Yeah.
And that's coming out of your office or coming out of budget and planning?
Probably
Planning and budget. Yeah. So.
And Mayor Ramsey, I'll just add that the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget has created, for lack of a better term, a local government kitchen cabinet. Andrew Gruber, myself, and a few others meet regularly with their staff. We're meeting once or twice a month at this point as we're working through these concepts. So I think the governor is very conscientious about coordinating with local governments and recognizes the pressure that you're all under right now with the growth challenges.
we've got counties there.
Yep, UX
Our main
there.
board there.
Yep, in fact, Jerry's there from Southeastern AOG, Southeastern Utah AOG. So it's, local voices from around the state. So
Good. That's all I have to add.
perfect. Well, and thank you, Mayor Ramsey, for all of your time on the UEOC. She's represented you extremely well in all the different meetings, both at the full level and in the subgroup, the sustainable community subgroup, which we'll talk about here in a moment. If you're good, I'll introduce Ben. We'll
Thank
get
you.
get
Love
cracking.
to. We
Okay.
appreciate Ben being here and he's been great to work with. So
Perfect.
take it
Well,
away.
thank you. We're joined today by Ben Harvin, who's the Deputy Director of the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity and has been the point person from the Governor's Office in the sustainable community subgroup within the UEOC. Ben previously worked in Layton City, so he understands local government, and he's been in the state for how many years now?
12?
Yeah, time flies.
I know.
Right? Because
You
I still
don't even
remember
look old
you.
enough to have been at the state for
Yeah.
12 years.
That's what I was just thinking too, because I remember you with Layton, and I guess time flies as you get old. So Ben, I should have done this at the beginning, but just to make sure you know who's in the room and online. So I'll start online. You have Mayor Andy Bierman from Park City, Councilmember Dustin White from Roosevelt, Mayor Mendenhall from Salt Lake, Mayor Fulmer from Vineyard, Mayor Arvey from North Salt Lake, Mayor-elect Monson from Blanding, Mayor Niehaus from Moab, Mayor Randall from St. George, Mayor Castleton from Eureka, and Mayor Walker from Draper. Those are the board members who are on the phone. And then we have Councilmember Bradshaw from Bountiful, Mayor Silvestrini from Mill Creek, Councilmember Egbert from Mapleton, Councilmember Malkovich from Woodland Hills, Mayor Kafusi from Provo, Mayor Ramsey from Sojo, Councilmember McKay from Riverton, Mayor Shepherd from Clearfield, Gary Hill, who's the city manager of Bountiful and represents the City Managers Association on the league board, and then Mayor Daines from Logan.
You get a gold star.
I'm gonna say,
That's
you have to go down the line.
You can do the whole league, I think.
I think you can. Every
So do.
mayor and council member from every community in the state. It's remarkable.
Yeah, I'll have to start over in January.
Yeah.
Anyway, Ben, I want to make sure you knew the audience. And so what we'd like to do over these next few minutes is give you an opportunity to present where things are now. The board packet for board has the UEOC draft, so we'll put that on the screen and people have it in their board packets. So you can talk through where we're at now, and then I'm sure there'll be questions for you. And it's 10:18, and so I'll keep an eye on the clock, but I don't want to shortchange the conversation either. So
Okay.
take it away.
Well, thank you, Cam. And first of all, I think everyone knows this, but Cam represents the league so well. He does an amazing job representing all of the cities and towns and municipalities across the state. And so it's a pleasure to be able to work with him. He is a great, not only advocate and a strong force for cities, but he's also somebody that really understands very complex issues. And so we appreciate the opportunity to negotiate and work with him. Also, thank you to you for your service. We just got done. I was watching the local elections up in Layton City where I live. And there's part of me that just thought as we were going through that, these public servants we have that are elected officials give up a ton of time and money to run. They get beat up a lot during the process. Then they finally get elected, and that's when the real pain starts, right? Every other week, or at least every week, a few hours at least in meetings, listening to very complex issues that impact communities. And so you have to pay a huge price to get in, and then once you get there, the real fun begins. And so I just want to say thank you to you for your service. It's not an easy thing to do, but there's a lot of people, I think, who do recognize all the good work you do for the cities, doing the business of our state. And so first, I just want to say that. And so second, is I still stay in contact with a lot of different cities and different municipalities across the state. And as we've been getting into this UEOC process, one of the dynamics that we've been coming across is one piece of policy in particular, so I'm probably going to spend most of the time talking about that. But what I noticed was there was a lot of ideas and perhaps narratives that were not exactly correct. And so as Cam and I were talking about this, he and I agreed that I would just come and just talk a little bit about how we got to this point, why we're here, and where we're going. And Nick, I'm going to ask you if we could make Kyle Palmer a panelist. He may already be a panelist.
I think we got it on here.
Okay.
Yep, I'm on, Ben. Thanks.
Thank you, Kyle. And that is just the voice of heaven. So thank you, Kyle. And then if we're able to show that language, so let me just take a couple of steps
And
back.
actually, Ben, really quick, it says host disabled participant screen sharing. So you might need to enable that function still.
I think, and you may have it already here, the language that you can just show.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Now we got it.
Yeah. So where we started with this, let me take a couple of steps back and just give you a little bit of history. One of the things that I had heard quite frequently was, well, the speaker and other legislators are just out to try and get more housing in the state of Utah. That is not what this is about. So let me take you back a couple of years. And the legislators, including now Speaker Wilson and also senators, my boss actually, when he was a senator, Dan Hammer, and others went around the state listening to different entities, cities, others. And one of the things that they found was there was this disconnect between what was happening at the city level and what was happening at the state level. So all of this kind of had its roots in this listening tour that was done 2 or 3 years ago. And one of the things that they noticed was that not only was there a little bit of a disconnect in terms of the incentives and some of those things that were being offered, but I think there was also a disconnect in communication as well. And so I think they were smarter because of that tour, because they went around and actually listened to people. And so I want to say, again, this is not strictly about housing. I think housing is enough of an issue that we're always looking for good solutions. But if you look at all the housing that's on the books right now, just the permitted lots in the state that everyone has in their cities, it's not about housing. I mean, I bet we've got probably 50,000 lots out there that you can build a house on that have permits for. And so when you look at the backlog of supply chain, the demand of supplies and materials, the construction backlog, like the cities are really doing an amazing job getting new projects into a process where they can be built on. Unfortunately, we're just seeing other choke necks in where we can actually build houses right now. And so it's not just this is a planning and zoning or a housing issue. It's much more broad than that. So as we looked across the spectrum and we were given direction, so the bill that this came out of was HB 348 during this last session. And HB 348 basically said, we want to be a little bit more picky about the incentives that we're giving away. And so if I can just speak philosophically for just 1 second, when we're talking about tax dollars and when we're talking about actually giving an incentive or a grant to a business, the feeling from the state of Utah right now in the legislature is we better have a really good reason for doing so. We're seeing significant growth, but we're also talking about advantaging one business over another. And so what that means is we are going to give one business a distinct advantage and potentially even monetary incentives to compete in the marketplace. Why are we doing that? If we do that, there better be a really good reason attached. And so HB 348 basically says, look, if we're going to give an incentive to a company, there has to be a stated public purpose, and we want a really good reason for doing so. Now, unfortunately, across the United States right now, you would think even in a good economy, we would see less incentives being given out to businesses because fewer businesses actually need that money. That's not what's happening. We're actually seeing more incentive dollars flow out the doors to businesses than what there was even during the Great Recession. So in the state of Utah, we're still seeing more that was given out, not only on the local level, but also on the state level. And there was real concern about that, knowing that we're in an inflationary environment right now, and we're seeing a lot of growth across the state of Utah. So what, as an example, was done, our EdTip program, which is the state's premier kind of flagship incentive for businesses, that was the first item that went to the chopping block. And so we negotiated with the legislature, and basically what they said, so when we bring in Goldman Sachs, Procter & Gamble, any of these big businesses, the incentive that the state actually puts on the table is EdTip. It's our tax increment program. So the state legislature said, you've got to cut it back significantly. So what we've done is now, instead of being open to any industry, we can now only offer incentives in 5 industries. So we've gone from having the ability to incent wherever, whenever, however, to now we can only do it for 5 industries. And that's in first and second class counties. In 4th, 5th, 6th, and 3rd to a degree, it's much more broad than that. So we can still provide those incentives in rural communities. But along the Wasatch Front, we're going to be much, much more limited in what we can do. So again, just 5 industries.
Are those part of post-performance
Yes.
when you do them? Okay.
Thank you. Good question, Mayor. It is all post-performance. So a company has to come in, they have to perform, create jobs, pay taxes, and then we get part of those taxes back. That's a great question. And so that's the way ours works. So we have a bill that is going through the session. We were able to get everything ready. So it's actually going to be a committee bill. It's in front of the EDWS committee tomorrow, or excuse me, Wednesday. And so that bill is going to, in essence, really, really narrow back the incentives that we can offer as a state, just our office, just as a state. Within this construct, though, of this bill, basically what they've said is, we want you to take a look and we want you to work with the league and the other stakeholders and come up with alignment between the different incentives. So as we've been talking about this, I think this has gotten caught up in the 50-50 conversation in other places. And we want to pull that back a little bit and change the narrative. So this is not an attack from a specific legislator trying to get more housing. That's not what this is. This is how do we make sure that whenever we provide a subsidy, we're doing it in a very, very conservative and intent-driven way, so that we know exactly what we want from that subsidy and we know what we're getting back and we know what the ROI is. So the request that has been made is that we're looking at the local tax increment options, that we look at incentive dollars that are given specifically for retail businesses. Now, again, this is not about housing. This is about how we're using tax increment. And so the direction that we've been given from the legislature and that our office agrees with, and we've had to take direction from the governor and others trying to make sure that we get to a right place. But the place that we have gotten to is at the local level, retail subsidies are seen as just changing the tax flow of dollars from one community to another. And that, you know, oftentimes we're just crossing boundaries or we're incenting a business to cross boundaries. Now that narrative is not totally true. I understand that. But I think the narrative that we're dealing with is a lot of times those incentives and those subsidies that are being given are not creating the type of return that we really want for the state of Utah. So again, back to this conversation about our EdTips program, we're only going to be doing it in specific industries: tech, financial services, aerospace and defense, advanced manufacturing, life sciences. So those are the 5 industries we can now offer an incentive with. So there was not the will to take all of that off the table for local, but rather to just say, let's come up with a solution where we can more wisely use our retail tax dollars at the local level. And so the compromise that we've been working on over the last 4 or 5 months now, and I really want to compliment those who've been part of this effort. I know this is not a welcome conversation. Us having to go from, you know, where we could go out and make deals with some really good companies, to all of a sudden we're now limited in what we can do has been frustrating for our office, if I can just speak candidly. But it's what we're being asked to do in this economy, to be more wise stewards of the taxpayer dollars. So what we're asking for with this conversation is, as we're looking at this and we're looking at retail, is there a way we can find a compromise that will ensure that we get the public benefit that should accompany any investment into a business? So what we're asking for, and we've been going through this process, and so this is the retail incentive subsidy that we've been working on. Representative Schultz is the one that has been chairing this. I really want to compliment. I know we haven't always agreed on everything, but I really appreciate Cam and Mayor Ram's work in this. They have been tremendous to work with, and I know we don't always see eye to eye, but I appreciate the fact that everyone's kind of willing to come to the table and have this conversation. So what we're talking about now is that retail incentives would not be permitted in the state of Utah unless it meets a few criteria. And so the number 1 criteria is that if it is given, and there's a million examples, so I'm sure we'll go through some of these examples, but if a retail incentive is given, then there has to be a housing component that is also included with it. So it doesn't mean that you cannot incentivize the Costco or the Cabela's or whatever big box, but if you're going to do it within that same project area, there also has to be a certain amount of housing that would accompany that. We've been trying to figure out the right way to, and I don't want to present this as final language because we're still working on all of this. Cam has had some really good thoughts in terms of how we define what amount of housing would have to accompany it. but you can still do it. It would just have to have housing that accompanies with it, that comes with it.
When
Now,
you say housing, what do you mean by housing?
Affordable housing or just,
Well, and I think the language says affordable housing, but as it's written now, it looks like the local agency gets to define what that is. Is that correct?
Okay.
But it's, but the 20, it's really 25%. I mean, if you look at that, it's.
You're correct.
25%.
I want to throw something at you, okay? So,
Yes.
so I live in Mill Creek. Mill Creek is a largely built out city. You know, we do have areas that require redevelopment, right? They're not greenfield developments. And I really don't have any issue about incentivizing big box. But even in connection to trying to put something together and selling a vision about that kind of redevelopment to attract the type of businesses that are necessary to make it successful in a mixed use center, okay? It really, I'm concerned about handcuffs on us that will limit our ability to do that. And, you know, what, I think we are an exhibit of one of the good kids, right? We're doing, you know, dense housing. We're doing a center that satisfies the Wasatch Choice 2050 concept of nodes of density that can be connected by transit, all this stuff. But some of this will really limit what we can do. And especially when we talk about not giving any kind of incentive to retail. I mean, some of the time things that we need to actually do to make this work are building infrastructure that serves that project, how to fund that. We're building parking. And so I'm a little troubled about when we start talking about it, the funds can only be used to support affordable housing, even in a mixed use concept, the way this is written. Does that let me build a parking structure that is necessary to be able to handle the extra people we're hoping this will draw to it, to make it a walkable, vibrant center? You know, I mean, I'm just concerned about unintended consequences.
yeah. And we're happy to change this. For those who are using it right, and where I would say, you know, there's 4 other exclusions here as well. So I don't think that B will make sense. So if you don't do housing, then if it could be in a census tract where the area median income is less than 70% of the state. I don't think that would meet what you're talking about here. But also for the renovation of reuse or previously constructed businesses, so that would be an out as well. Now, the one that I did want to bring up for historical Main Street renovation projects. So if you're talking about a greenfield redevelopment that is kind of your historical core, then you wouldn't have to have a housing component to go along with that per se. Now, again, to your point, we didn't define that. And so it is a little bit loose right now. So depending upon what you're talking about, I mean, it could fit into that. And also for local small business support programs. So if it's, you know, we're really trying to get more small retail businesses into our community, that's an option as well, where you wouldn't have to have a housing component, but you could do grants to help these businesses get started in your community. So we're not trying to, we're trying to find the right outs in terms of how can we make sure that for a project like that, it's still going to work. Like there's part of me that's tempted just to say, if this meets the outline of what's, you know, in Wasatch Vision 2050, then there's an exclusion there too. Like, I don't know if there's a right way to say that, but you know, if you're trying to create a mixed use environment, like I think that's the purpose of this, is to try and create more of that. So
right, and my concern is that I can see this even limiting that. So, you know, back to my town, we're not renovating historic Main Street, okay? That the place that we're dealing with in our city center by the Brickyard is all obsolete 1950s retail that doesn't work anymore. It really doesn't make any sense to rehabilitate that. It makes sense to scrape that and build mixed use projects that have retail on the ground floor, housing above. So I can't use the historical stuff. But I need to be able to build infrastructure to support that additional density. And I need to be able to have adequate parking so that people don't shy away from that. No offense, Salt Lake City, but you know, I hear all the time, don't make this like Sugar House. The thing about that is, and you know, this may change, you know, in the future, hope it does in terms of the amount of parking that we need. But right now, in order to make this work, people have to be, especially in a suburban environment, they cannot be afraid of that I will get down there and won't find any parking, or they'll go someplace else. So
I may have misunderstood, but I think you absolutely fit an A. So you have how you want to do retail on bottom and housing above, and you want to build a parking garage. Yeah, you would absolutely fit an A. Yes.
I think, if I may, Mayor, because we're seeing something similar in Bountiful. Some of the challenges they're not part of the same project in time. We have a project area in Bountiful, Clearfield's very similar, where you have components that come over time. We have this historic Main Street. I'm not sure it would fit under that. And we have another area of town that this applies to too, where 25 years ago, these were small grocery stores, they were car dealerships. Over time, that is transitioning. And, we may get some housing here, we may get a little bit of retail here, but in order to create this sense of place, it's not like we're looking at an individual business that is also going to build housing at the same time. Housing may already be there, or the retail may already be there. It's filling in these gaps to make the entire location work, not at one single time. I can appreciate the thinking behind a large project, but I think what a lot of us are talking about, and I can think of Provo. I mean, I can look around the table and think almost all of us are in the same situation where you have a large area where it is a key component of that area that we're trying to incentivize. Bountiful's, our Main Street's a good example right now. For the last 15 years, we've been slowly having both housing and this conversion of old, non-viable retail like car dealerships or small grocery turn into small boutiques, be scraped, turn into mixed use housing. One of the things we're missing, again, because they're all gone, is a retail component that truly makes that area, I should say grocery component that makes that area really walkable. What we hope to be able to do is provide some incentives in terms of infrastructure. They're going to have to upsize storm drain to be able to do that. They're going to have to upsize power, things of that nature that we believe we can incentivize to bring someone in that would actually help grow both the housing component as well as the other retail that would come by itself. We don't have any intention of giving it as a direct subsidy. But we can't help buy down the cost of converting that property from an old, unsuitable retail use to a new use, then we're really stuck, and we're stuck in neutral for a long, long time. That's the tools. Those are the tools that we really want to preserve. I don't think there's anybody here around the table that thinks it's a good idea for Bountiful to compete against West Bountiful for big box retail. We just get played against each other.
So let me,
Hey, this is Julie Fulmer. I just wanted to jump in really quick and kind of along the same lines. Ben, I think you could bolster C, the renovation or reuse of previously constructed buildings, just to incorporate a more infrastructure based wording for redevelopment. And that would be for any brownfield site, not necessarily to incentivize cost directly attributed to businesses, but more for that infrastructure cost that's coming in that just don't seem to be covered in here. But other than that, I think it's good, but you could definitely bolster it with something with redevelopment and infrastructure. So those of us that are incorporating 75% of us, our city in a brownfield site would be covered in that ability to bring businesses where the DEQ says we can't attribute housing or any of the things incorporated currently.
it's a great comment. Thank you, Mayor. And so let me just mention a couple of things. So one, this is not retroactive, will not affect any existing project areas. Two, it won't take effect until July 1, 2022. So if there are any project areas you do want to put on the books, you could do that prior to this going into effect. So just those two things being out there.
Did you say again?
July 1st, 2022.
Oh, okay.
So if there are project areas you would want to put on the books, you could do that before this went into effect. On the, we've got to find the right way to say this. On the infrastructure piece, we absolutely know that there is going to need to be oversized. There's going to need to be, that would all be allowed here without having to do housing or anything like that. The wording we've been looking for, Cam, and we haven't quite been able to find it. In my mind, I always call it the last mile. Some people call it the on-site, some people call it the direct. But if you're going to oversize for a community, that would still be allowed. So it wouldn't dictate anything like that. It would just be the final infrastructure to that direct retailer. So you could still do all of the infrastructure throughout the area, just not that last piece directly to it.
Mayor Ramsey, can I jump in? This
Yes.
piece?
Mayor
So-
Mendenhall has her hand up as well.
Perfect. So the proposal that the league board, those of you who joined the board in October, the last board meeting of the old board at the annual convention provided some key principles, one of which was this infrastructure piece. So one of the concepts that was in your board packet where we were trying to define infrastructure, that then we can talk about is using the impact fee statute and distinguishing between system improvements and project improvements.
Yeah, yep.
That could go a long ways toward addressing the infrastructure question. So Mayor Ramsey looks at Mayor Mendenhall.
Yes, please, Mayor Mendenhall.
Thank you. Thanks for all the work that's been done on this. I think it's come a long way, and it's a lot better than where we started out. So I appreciate Mayor Ramsey and Cam working with you, Ben, and your team. There are just a couple of requests from Salt Lake City. One would be that we include active transportation as one of the characteristics of a qualifying development: adjacency, promotion of, facilitation of. And I think Angela Price on our team has been working with you all on what we'd like to see there, but that's a key component for us. And secondly, that we explicitly define affordable housing as 40% AMI and below, and just to make it consistent with the rest of the code that we're seeing. So those are our two requests.
So Mayor, if I understood correctly, the request number one was to have an active transportation node that is included with this. And the second, what in terms of making it a qualifying area, and the second was that we define affordable housing as 40% AMI. Did I hear that correctly?
Now, but
Yes.
I think that would be a problem for our community.
Yeah, I would think for us.
That's going to be a real challenge to make some mixed use projects that we have perhaps on track happen. If we have to go that low, and again, do we have the numbers?
Yeah.
Ben, is there much recognition of the importance of placemaking in this conversation? This all seems to be around use of tax dollars but one of the huge things that cities do is try and create a sense of place for the betterment of our community, regardless of the tax benefit. Bountiful's Main Street is never going to be, for example, the retail center that it was 20 years ago. But I can tell you that if it is blighted and it isn't turned into a gathering place for the community, it's going to have an impact, economic impact, as well as just a blight impact on the rest of the community. So much of what we're trying to do is create a sense of place that can't really be measured by tax impact. And so I think one of the things that we're struggling with is how do we, even some of that is on-site infrastructure. How do you incentivize that old gross retail parking lot that now you want to have somebody come in, but they're going to have to make some on-site improvements, that may be water lines, that may be sewer, that doesn't directly benefit them financially as far as sales tax, but helps both of us get rid of this blighted old space and turn it into something that's beneficial for the community.
So you would have that out under just Bountiful specifically, under the historical Main Street renovation.
But I
You
hope
would
you
have the ability
understand
to do that.
what you keep trying to do with respect is find how it fits for us individually. I think what I'm trying to represent is one size doesn't fit all. This isn't necessarily a location in a historic Main Street. We have these locations all over all of our towns, and you can't really pigeonhole them into one of these categories. So I guess we're struggling with how do we find a way to not take away that really necessary tool, but still meet the intent of not fighting with each other over retail.
Yeah, because it's more about beautification, not just preserving certain historical things or benefiting the company necessarily, but contributing to the project to beautify the area and create quality of life.
Look, here's what I would say. We can find a way to make this work. It might appear like one-offs, But the one-offs is we're talking with people, they really do accommodate a lot of different circumstances. What we need though is an actual willingness to compromise on this. What I'm hearing from a lot of people is just stay out of my business, don't get involved, leave us alone. And I hear that, I understand that, but at the same time, that's not what the state legislature is looking to do. They're saying, show us the purpose for why we're doing this. Show us a really good public purpose for why we're doing this. And if we can't do that, then why are we giving one business an advantage over another? So honestly, I really believe we can find middle ground on a lot of these things. But for those who are just saying, stay out of my business,
So I've got an idea there, okay? I mean, and like I think what Gary said, is none of us are, we are not arguing with you about incentivizing big bucks. But what we are saying is it's really hard to craft a statute that isn't restrictive of the creativity that we have, okay? So what if there were some kind of a commission or appeal board that could look at a project that was maybe atypical, you know, like, because I don't have a history.
A
of
variance
downtown,
board.
Okay, but I want to make one. Someday it will be one, right?
Yeah.
But so how about a way to appeal this? If we can make a case to show how this incentive actually contributes to something that is coincident with the goals of the state to accommodate growth, fulfill Wasatch Choice 2050, right? It's not being done to in a land grab for sales tax, okay? I mean, why can't we have that type of flexibility? Because we can give you examples, but we can't possibly think of everything that might arise until it comes up. And I'll tell you what, this language that says that in a mixed use development that has to have essentially, you know, 25%, you know, AMI affordability, that we can only use the funds for affordable housing. That means to me that it's got to be used to build housing. It can't be used to build a pipe to accommodate that housing. We can't permit that if we don't have a sewer to it.
But that may work in some areas. And you said something that concerns me a little bit, Ben, which is the feeling that we're not willing to compromise. I think you may hear from individual cities that they'd like to have it all. I know of a few that just say, why are we compromising? But I hope a message that you take away from this board, I mean, I'm looking at Dawn in particular, is, yeah, we're absolutely willing to compromise and recognize that many of the things in here make sense. We don't want to throw everything out, but I think we are looking for some more help with that infrastructure placemaking piece.
Can I just piggyback on Mayor Silverstern? Nobody likes the Mother May I, but Mother May I is okay as long as that's not the word never. We need an outlet to be able to come and say, listen, we have a food desert in West Provo that's been there for years and years. We have 10,000 homecoming coming. Grocery stores aren't willing to come because they're getting tax incentives all across the nation. I mean, is there somewhere we can come and plead our case and say, carve us out? We need help with this. Mother May I?
Well, and I think food is one of the key components. It's not just regular retail of clothing or whatever, but the food component is something that needs to have some incentivized.
But how do you, playing devil's advocate on that
I
one,
know,
on food? If it's a grocery store, very easy to say that that's food. If it's Costco, that is food, and just about every other thing.
Right.
It's really difficult to say, okay, well, that's food though. And it's, you know, we need this West Provo. And man, I mean, they really need some food out there. So we lined up Costco to come in as our grocery store. And everyone's gonna be able to shop at Costco.
We're not begging it from
Exactly. But I just want to clarify that, you know, just devil's advocate, that's kind of a.
Depends how big the box.
At least in a weird situation. I mean, ours has been incentivizing rehab of a downtown. I mean, and our housing has come first. So to tie something to housing on our end and say, well, you got to do housing in addition to this. We did. And we overdid, and we've done our part in a couple of other city parts. And so now for the state to say, oh, but if you want to develop this and bring something in, you better do more. And then now it has to be affordable.
So again, it just reminds us, right? The state hates it when the federal government comes in and tells them what to do. And we hate it when the state comes down and tells us what to do.
Mayor Ramsey, Chair, may I speak? Sorry, it's hard to bust in since I'm not in the room. Couple of things. Number one, as the person in this meeting that's probably geographically furthest from any big box retailer, as I'm 2 hours away from Walmart, I do think that I am interested in hearing about the perceived impact, have a conversation about the possible impact that this would have on rural and remote communities, being able to incentivize retailers. It's true. I'm just going to say it, that the greatest asset of the state of Utah is actually found in our rural communities. We fuel the Wasatch Front with food and energy and tourism and respite. So I'm hopeful that, the rural and remote communities don't lose a mechanism to be able to get retail, to incentivize retail. That was my first comment. But second, I would like to go back to Mayor Mendenhall's question about the definition of AMI, because we're looking at the spread of housing needs across our state. We're talking about whose responsibility it is to shelter those that don't have housing, and so I'm just curious if we could just talk a little bit more about that that definition of housing, of affordability.
In here.
Yes, okay, and we have Mayor Bierman has had his hand up for a while as well. So I'm going to turn to Mayor Bierman and then Mayor Daines.
Yeah, thanks, Ben, can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Thanks for meeting with us today, and thanks for working on a compromise. I've got a question for you that's kind of specific, so I hate to focus on one-offs, but in the past, Park City has worked closely with our resorts doing some incentives for higher density developments at the base to preserve open space around those. And both bases are currently looking at redevelopments, and they're looking for incentives as well as discussions on PIDs and such. And so since ski resorts generate significant retail dollars, I'm wondering if you can give me some idea how we might be impacted by this.
So all those are very good questions. Mayor Niehaus, I'm actually going to answer your couple of questions first, if that's okay. And Kyle, I'm going to ask you to just update in real time. Could you add a section F that creates an ombudsman process? And I think whatever this group wants the membership to do, we're happy to do.
Yeah, before we jump to an ombudsman, I think that's something that's worth discussing further before we say it's an official league offer, because I think it's an interesting idea, but there may be other ways to do it. So
I'm not sure. For example, I'm terribly comfortable with it.
Yeah.
right. So
I'm just looking for a safety valve to,
Right.
for creativity somehow.
Yeah, I agree. So just before we put it on there, I think there's more to be discussed there. So go ahead, Ben.
Well, I will just say, Kyle, it doesn't have to, we will not represent that this is an official position, but I do like that idea. So let's add an ombudsman process, just for those who want to bring a process through outside of this, they would have the release valve to do so. So we are going to create that, but we will not represent that's an official position. To the question regarding AMI, we're happy to take your direction. Whatever the league, and again, it doesn't have to be an official position, but whatever the league is comfortable with, we're happy to do in terms of AMI. Mayor Niehaus, to your other question, we had in here in an earlier draft, everything that was 4th, 5th, and 6th class was automatically given the ability to do whatever they wanted. So there were no handcuffs, quote unquote, the way that this has. The reason they pulled it out is because they felt like it was redundant to a certain degree, and I apologize because there is some generalization that happened, but the 70% AMI, there was a feeling that some areas in 4th, 5th, 6th class counties may actually have a really high AMI and not need it. And so the idea was the census tracts where there is 70% AMI would, in essence, give a lot of those rural communities that need the ability to do it automatic, whatever they need to do. And so that was the feeling, was the 70% was kind of a catch-all. I don't think we'd have any problem putting the 4th, 5th, 6th class counties back end, if we want to specifically call that out. So
Yes,
Andy,
please. Thank you.
Andy, that probably solves your question as well if we put that back in. But I think the question that Andy Mayer was asking, just to give a little bit more context there, was how would this impact his ability to partner with and create density for these tourism opportunities and ski operators, whatever it may be. And so I think the idea is that if you're going to partner with them, and you're in a 4th, 5th, 6th class county, and we add that back in, I just want to caveat that, then you'd be able to do whatever you wanted to do. But if we kept this, my guess is Park City is not 70% AMI. So you could still do it. You would just have to meet one of these other criteria. Or you now have a release valve that you could appeal to as well. But if you did that housing component, then it would automatically qualify. So whether you were to do that housing now or later, as long as it's set up, I think it meets the statute. I am going to ask Kyle, could you pull out that's just confusing everybody. The taxes may only be used to support structured parking for housing and no other housing costs. We've been battling over this one forever now. We're just going to nix that one. We did in the last meeting, and Representative Schultz asked us to add it back in. So we're just going to keep pulling it out until he doesn't know.
Until it stays out.
Right. So we'll pull that section out. So it does for those who had concerns about, is this just for one potential element? This would give you a more broad use of that. And I think that's the concern that I'm hearing. And so we're happy to do that.
Thank you. Let's go to Mayor Danes.
Yeah, just quickly, 2 things. One, on the housing, what Logan is missing is that middle housing. We already have a lot of the low income housing for the whole valley. So the way it's written right now, I think it gives the agency the ability to set what that needs to be there for their community. And if that can stay in, then I think that gives us all flexibility to decide where we need to be. And Salt Lake may be a very different place than the rest of us. Just another quick question to throw in, kind of the sidelight is, we have a big manufacturing, company, Gosner's, but they also have a small retail component, and they talked about perhaps expanding that, which, could really be an interesting idea. So that's just another specific to think about that, does that eliminate that?
I love Gosner. That's my favorite shopping mall.
Yeah, I know people love to come. I mean, they've talked about, expanding their retail to something like a Tillamook or something like, they do. So
We didn't have it in here previously. I do like the idea of if it supports mixed use development, which I think comes back to the Wasatch vision, small elements of retail are really good. So we'll see if we can find a way to.
But Gosner's out there in the industrial area, I mean, they're kind of unique in that they do have a retail presence, but it's not a place appropriate to even put high density housing, I don't think.
Right. No, that makes sense.
So actually, Mayor Ramsey, just to follow up on what both Mayor Bierman and Mayor Dane said, because I just want to make sure I'm clear on the fact patterns. So Mayor Bierman, in your case, when you're talking about higher density, it's not higher density for housing, it's higher density for general development, which includes resort lodging and ski lifts and everything that goes with it. And obviously there's a huge retail component that comes with that, but you're essentially trading that for open space elsewhere. So it doesn't really fit in a housing exception or Wasatch choice exception because it's a really unique fact pattern, but has a major retail component. Am I correct, Andy?
Thanks, Cam. I was having the same thought. I really don't think that that category covers us.
So if we put in the fourth, is Summit
They're
fourth?
third now.
Are they third? Wow.
And then Mayor Dane, just to make sure I'm clear on the fact pattern here as well. Gosner's in an industrial area, so you'll never have a mixed use development in an industrial area. So there's a retail component, but it supports a larger goal. Because then in a way, what I'm thinking on both of these is I think it's getting back to some of your earlier comments of like, if we are spending tax dollars on X, what is the broader public benefit? And I think both of these illustrate, the Gosner Foods and ski resorts illustrate the broader benefit that doesn't fit into one of these exceptions, but clearly has a benefit above and beyond just, this will make more money for the city.
That can apply a Provo situation too.
You know,
I
I-
carry my concern.
Yeah, so as smaller cities, one of the concerns we have is we live in a county that's a higher class county, but as cities, we're in well, you're in fourth, I'm in sixth. So it's very difficult to come in with the requirements for a higher class county when you're a lower class city. And to come, there's a very different component there as we try to figure out where's our community development, where's our economic development coming from? We're at the small end, we're just barely over the size of the town, but we live in a large county.
Which cities?
So I live in the city of Woodland Hills, so, we have 1,500 people, but we live in Utah County. And so as we are trying to figure out what our economic development or community development is, and in that planning process right now, some of these infrastructure matters for sure would come into play for our city in terms of how would we incentivize people to come to our area, because we're in this larger, and you're in Mapleton,
And
the
we
same
have,
type of thing.
so if you compare side by side a Provo issue and a Mapleton issue, very different cities. Mapleton has 11,000 plus residents and no grocery store. Okay, so literally we have to go spend our dollars in Springville or Spanish Fork. We have a place where a grocery store indicated they're coming in, but they have zero incentive to come in. So my concern here is, okay, well, we have a food desert in terms of our municipality. Yeah, technically there are grocery stores in other cities, but for us, where we have limited retail income whatsoever, I mean, we're a bedroom community, and this is very important to us. How does this help us in any way with this very specific need for the place we've built, and also help Provo with their food desert in that unique area of Provo, which, yeah, you needed that for 30 years.
That's placemaking and quality of life.
Placemaking, yeah.
And those are hard to define.
As
right?
you try to incentivize or have the housing component, people don't want it without the other amenities, right? They don't want to drive the hour to wherever. And so I think it's important that we recognize that as we are trying to fit into the narrative, how can we plan for the needs and the quality of life that our residents want, and the housing component as well, but then have the restrictions of this higher class county.
Yeah, that is a tough one. I think for food deserts, and I think there's a lot of them across the state, there's no question about that. The thing that I would come back to though is if you're going to incentivize them to come in, what's the public purpose? And I get that residents may not have to drive as far, but I think we're saying what's the greater public purpose?
Well, what's acceptable to you is the public purpose.
Yeah.
That's what I want to know.
Yeah, I'm just the convener in all of this.
Because I can make an argument, but what will
Right.
pass?
Yeah,
Exactly.
I think in this case, if we've got a circuit breaker that you could come to, and I think we tried to call out specifically for areas that had a food desert where there was a lower AMI. So if it is an area where the combined AMI.
We're way higher AMI.
Yeah,
So it's a different, again, different
another
situation.
component.
What's,
So can I jump in here too?
Yeah.
So it's 11:04, so we have 26 minutes left. And, part of the main objective today was not necessarily to litigate every line. It was to make sure we're bringing up all the concepts so that the three of us, as we're meeting tomorrow, and can proceed accordingly. So I think the point's been made. I've got it recorded. There were a couple other hands, Mayor Ramsey.
We're gonna go
and then
take
we'll
Brad
get to
Sean
some.
next. Yeah, go ahead.
And hopefully you can see everyone's got some very detailed examples from their individual cities. And that, I think, brings me to my overarching concern is that it feels like we're responding by bringing up, many of these individual concerns in different cities across the state that are different inside counties. And I guess I'd like to flip this argument on its head a little bit. I'd like to hear from you, what these specific things are that you're driving at, because rather than us bringing up examples of why this won't work, I'd like to hear more of that, the specific things that we're doing when we kind of made this broad statement that we are not interested in fighting over big box retail. We're interested in these infrastructure redevelopment, placemaking components. And so what are the objections there? Because it feels like we're arguing about having a broad thing and then having to delicately carve these things out instead of flipping that argument the other way. So I'd really like to have you respond to that so that informs our board discussions.
I don't think there's any pushback. I mean, if we find the right way for placemaking, here's the concern, Kate, and it's a good question. I think what we would say is, does it just kick the door open so that we really aren't doing anything? And so I think that's the pushback. So if we can find the right carve out language, I don't think there's a pushback for it.
So I'm going to push you on this one a little bit more because that feels like this really broad statement, and I quite frankly, I need you to get more specific, and I think the rest of the board does too. Because if you want us to respond, it can't be that we just feel like we're doing nothing when quite frankly, this has taken significant league staff time and those that serve on the executive committee's time, and we feel like we have them. So I would really like for you to get more specific. That to me feels like what we're being accused of, just stay out of our business. That feels like a broad statement, right?
Okay.
So I need you to get narrower if we're going to try and meet you somewhere.
Happy to accommodate your request. Could you ask me the very specific question you're looking for an answer for?
So what are the exact things that you want us to drill down on that you object to on flipping the narrative, on placemaking, on infrastructure redevelopment? So I'd like, rather than us raising the individual projects within many communities that we can raise, I'd like to see why did that even need to be a component here?
So if I understand the question is, what are my concerns with placemaking and brownfield development? Is that correct?
And what you wanted to call last mile, I don't know, Ken, what we've decided to call it, the last mile infrastructure components. It maybe not be specific to a Brandsville, because those aren't going to exist in every community.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I'm not answering this the way you want it, but I'm going to try my best, okay? And if I don't, then I hope I can find the right way to say this. If we put placemaking in there as line G, I don't think anyone's going to have a concern. So I don't think there are concerns with it. Redevelopment, I think we're trying to get there in terms of renovation and reuse of previously constructed buildings. You know, we're trying to mix the other one. I think we're open to those things. I don't think that we would say we're not open to those items. I think we're just trying to find the right way to order them.
Mayor, can I,
Yes.
can I maybe ask a really simple question? What are you not open to? Pretty much, I mean, and I'm not being facetious here. I mean, we brought up a lot of exceptions, and you said, yeah, those are good ideas. That's something we can. What are we trying to kill here? What are we not trying to incentivize? Period. That's the right line.
Yeah.
I think what we would want to get away from is any subsidies for retail and commercial developments where there is no very identified return on investment, no public purpose. And so the way that we're approaching that, now Kate, to your point, that's a very broad statement. The devil's in the details, or the angels in the architecture, as Cam says. And so I think that's where we're trying to get to now is if the state powers to be had their way, they'd probably say, we're not going to incentivize any more retail in the state of Utah because there's no public purpose for it. And I think what we're trying to build is an argument back to say, no, there is a public purpose for doing it in the right way, at the right time, in the right places. And so I think what we're trying to say through this process is, how do we make sure that there are these allowances wherever it does make sense? I don't think this is supposed to be meant to be the final. I think we need to continue this process and make sure that we refine this even in future years. And so again, I don't know that I'm answering your questions perfectly. I apologize if I'm not, but I think that's kind of where we're trying to get to, is trying to find this compromise between state leaders who are saying, we don't want to do any retail any further, and cities who, this is how things work. And I've done economic development in a city, so I know how it works. So.
If we bridge that gap, then because you've got all of these local examples, it feels like we're just from reading kind of your body language and responses, it feels like what you're feeling like is well, you're just gonna come up with a scenario that doesn't work in every single instance. And I think what we're feeling is, these are the boots on the ground. These are what mayors and councils do. We do the boots on the ground. We know our communities intimately. And so I think we need to hear those, the more specific policy objections to these things, and hopefully that'll come out in one of these future meetings.
I appreciate, Kate, can we get a definition of what is acceptable public purpose?
Thank you. So I think acceptable public purpose.
You don't have to throw it out today. I'm just gonna put that request.
I'm not gonna give everyone a perfect answer. The only thing that I'm asking for is that you're at least open to this concept and we can have an open, honest conversation. And am I gonna give you exactly what you want? Probably not, to be honest. But can we at least find room to compromise? I hope so. And so as we look at a public purpose, demonstrated economic development, public purpose, when we look at why we would ever subsidize a business, just saying, well, we want it closer to our citizens, just speaking candidly, is probably not the public purpose that we're looking for. What we're looking for, and since I've been asked, I'm going to give you a very honest response, is defined even in our statute, is we are going to provide a public subsidy to places that will provide family sustaining jobs, meaning that it will create economic growth that will help to pull the rest of the economy. That's really, really important. And the reason I say that, and I'm going to push back a little bit to those who are saying that's a really high standard. Let me ask you this, why else would you give one business a competitive advantage over another? What's the good enough reason? And defined in statute, the state legislature has said it has to be for high growth, high wage jobs that are going to serve as an economic multiplier throughout the rest of the economy. So the feeling here is, look, retail is going to follow rooftops. Typically, that's the way that it works. So if we create good paying jobs and a great place for retailers to do business, then why do we still have to provide a direct subsidy to those retailers? So in terms of what we're asking for and what the state is saying is, look, if you ever make a public investment into a business and you're giving a developer or a retailer or anyone an advantage over their competition, it better have a good reason. You better have a good reason for doing so. And when I say that, that is the defined purpose, is that it will create high wage jobs that will help to pull the rest of the economy. So we don't have to create the retailer, but we can create a good environment for those retailers to operate.
If I can jump in here, I personally, as the one who goes to the table with Cam, with all of your input, appreciate this conversation so very much. And I need to let you know, Ben has been incredibly helpful. And this started as a one sentence policy proposal, no more retail incentives in the state of Utah, period. And no carve outs, no exceptions, no unintended consequences, simply consequences. It is what it is. That's where we started.
Mayor Ramsey, can I add one thing?
Yes.
Now, just I want to make it clear too. I invited Ben because he's been on the front lines of negotiations. So he's been taking some arrows today that aren't actually arrows
They
that
shouldn't be aimed at
the
him.
governor's office because he's the messenger.
Yeah.
Because in many ways, that line that Mayor Ramsey just described wasn't coming from the governor's office. It was coming from legislators
Right.
that they had tasked the governor's office with delivering.
Right. That's why, so they don't have to take the arrows.
I just want to make sure everybody's kind of clear on.
Yeah.
I totally get that.
Yeah.
I appreciate
We
the
get
fact that
that.
you've been.
We understand the process too.
So anyway, continue.
So anyway, I just wanted to say that in Ben's defense, he has been tasked with being the frontline negotiator along with, Cameron, and as we've been at this table and done all of this work, then he gets to go back and let the legislature know this is where it's at, legislators, and report back to the governor's office, and we're having those conversations with all of them. But we've come so very far. And one thing that I think I just need to know is, if we as a board are still, this is certainly not done, but taking into account all of these specific scenarios that are different in every community, those things are really trying to be worked on as carve-outs. The intent of these legislators is to pass a broad policy that is going to change the way we do retail incentives in the state of Utah. And what we're working so hard on, and what Ben has been such a good partner to work on and recognize, is all of these scenarios that are coming out that I appreciate each of you sharing. saying, okay, what about this? And so to make a place where those things can still happen. It is not going to end up that everything we've always done can still happen. But is this board supportive of continuing working on this list and being mindful of the specifics that we can do to make sure that infrastructure is not, off the table? I think, so what I'm hearing is that this board continues to be, and we are a different iteration than we were in September, but that this board continues to be supportive of, we're okay with not incentivizing Costco to come into, X city versus Y city or whatever, big box retail, city against city. I think it sounds to me like we're okay with not throwing tax dollars at that. But as far as some of the rest of the nuances that are just broad and so varied in our cities, are you supportive of continuing with the understanding that the policy objective that has been proposed is to change the way retail incentives are done in the state of Utah? And now we continue to work on A, B, C, D, subsection, all of the things. We continue to try to work there to get to a place where we feel good about it, they feel good about it, and we can come together and end up with a policy proposal to the legislature, because that is going to happen. The policy proposal will go to the legislature in January, and it will be ready, and it will be approved by the UEOC and ready to run as a bill. We have a lot of work to keep doing to get there, but so much has been done to get us to this place. It's night and day from where we started, and there's still much to continue working on. But are you supportive of, we're okay with not incentivizing big box retail one city against another, and we're okay with continuing this process of working through these nuances so that the policy is going to change, but we've been able to carve out as much as we can, figure out a way to really still be able to create placemaking and all the things that we've discussed. Are you okay with the direction that we're going as we keep working on this?
Mayor Ramsey, can I just say one quick thing? This is Mayor Niehaus.
Please.
I think what I recognize in this dialogue and hearing from all of you is that, and recognizing that our governor's doing what I think he can to incentivize development in rural Utah. This is actually a comment to you board members, especially as I only get to sit with you maybe one more time in this official capacity. And that is, I love shopping in Provo because Provo has things that I can't buy in my own community, but I actually do. I mean, do I say I want to compete with Provo to get more retail in Moab? Maybe. And maybe there is, to pit it as competition is, I don't think, fair. It's about growth and expansion that's going to make for a healthier Utah. So that when you come to Moab to recreate, but you need to buy a pillow, that there's a retailer here where you can purchase a pillow, since the place that you're staying just has the worst pillows ever. A toothbrush when you're recreating in Moab. I just, Ben, I don't know if there's more room to expand on the why as being a way to incentivize rural. I mean, gosh, druthers would make me say only cities and towns, 4th, 5th, and 6th. But then you all might get mad at me if I were to say that. But I think that's the point of the incentive, or this, I don't know. It seems like maybe that's a deeper effort of our governor and the legislature. But I just wanted to one more time advocate for, definitely making sure that it's not income-based, but it's 4th, 5th, and 6th as well.
Thank you for that. And I think you're absolutely right. The governor is extremely mindful. And as the first rural Utahn ever elected governor, it is, top of mind for him and priority to make sure that rural Utah's needs are met. And as we grow, they are, which is why at this point, it's gone from nothing across the board to, cities of 4th, 5th, and 6th class. You can still do whatever you want. So you actually could incentivize a place with your county. Oh, the county.
Yeah.
Sorry, the county. But Grand County could still incentivize differently than Utah County could for Provo, right?
But here's a real scenario. So as I've been driving for the past 4 years up to Salt Lake City to be with all of you and advocate for rural Utah, I have seen the explosion of development in Spanish Fork. And every time I drive through Spanish Fork, I think to myself, I wish I saw this development in Price. Price is, I think, a city of the fifth class. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. They are. And so, I mean, if
There are 8,800.
so if Price were to, I don't want to say compete because that's not fair. That's not the spirit. This isn't in the spirit of competition. But if Price were able to incentivize Costco in a way that probably Spanish Fork did, then we would see that deeper economic development in our area. And so that's a real example of where an incentive for rural, if that incentive wasn't available to a larger city or town, might actually incentivize that growth in rural. So there's a real example that I see every time I visit all of you of where incentives create a disparity and further create the economic development potential of rural communities and cities and towns. I hope that example helps.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I just want to say that I have seen this problem, in living in Riverton. We were just competing with Harriman, and we did give up, and gave them some tax incentives. And I think Costco would have come anyways, but instead our city did have to give up for it, and our school district and our kids gave up for it. And so I do believe that there's a need for it. It's, it's nice if it, for us, if it comes down from the state and it isn't Riverton saying, no, we aren't going to compete in this because we don't want it to go to the neighboring city. But if the cities didn't have to compete, and so I do think that there's a balance and we have to allow exceptions. But for our city, I do think that overall it's a good policy. So thank you. Yeah.
Okay, if we have two more things on the agenda. Mayor Niehaus, I appreciate your comments and assure you that the concerns and the needs of rural Utah are very high on the list of what is being discussed at every level. The legislature, the governor's office, what we're bringing from the league, how we're working with Ben, those are key conversations being had. And that will continue to happen. It sounds to me, and it looks like, and I want anybody who's online to tell me if you feel differently, but the consensus in this room appears to be that kind of what I propose, let's keep working on this the way it is, with the direction we're going that you seem supportive of as we continue to work through this to try to get to a place which we will bring back to you before this gets presented to the UEOC. You're okay with the direction we continue to work as we try to sort through some of these challenges to create the appropriate carve outs and subsections and whatever to still accomplish some broader policy change, which is going to happen, and to leave cities as flexible as can be with our own placemaking and changes that we need to make as we grow.
Mayor, Cam, Ben, there's an interesting section of the state code dealing with municipal powers and authorities, and I think it gets to what is the public good that we're after here. And one of the things that we are all charged with is health, safety, prosperity, moral well-being, peace, order, comfort, and the convenience of the inhabitants of our municipalities. I think that is our mission of public good.
I love that you pulled that up. I love that.
Just love the state code and my digital pocket constitution.
I want to publicly thank Ben for taking the time to meet today, but not just today, but for the last 3 months as we've been having these conversations. I assume, Ben, a lot of what you heard today isn't actually new because a lot of these conversations have been happening. Is there anything else you want to add before we go to the next item?
No, I'm cognizant that I'm adding one more burden to your plate that you don't need. Like, I'm just being honest, like the cities and everything that all of you have going on in your lives, I know you don't need this. And so thank you for what you do. I mean that genuinely. And I know you don't hear it enough, but what you do to make the state better is so imperative. And so I know we're not going to see eye to eye on everything, but I genuinely mean this. Thank you for your service. And I hope I can be of service wherever is needed in the future. But we'll keep going through this. We'll keep looking at different iterations. We'll keep making changes to see if we can get to a better spot. But just know that, again, you don't hear it enough for what you do. So just thank you for all that you do. And I promise we'll be as responsive as we can to all of these different situations.
Mayor Ramsey, can I have one last thing? Timing wise, the full UEOC next meets in the early January. There's not a December meeting.
Correct.
This is why I felt like it was vital, once the UEOC adopted kind of the general framework, to have Ben come on behalf of the UEOC and say, here's the general objective, and have dedicated enough time for this type of candid conversation. And so, Mayor Ramsey, my recommendation for the board is Ben has seen a compare contrast document that I put together a few weeks ago, and then I updated that it's currently in your board packet. I need to go through all the 6 pages of notes that I've gathered from this meeting.
Cam's just been typing like crazy.
And then
Everything everyone said, Cam has down.
right, so the subgroup of the UEOC is going to be meeting every 2 weeks. We meet tomorrow, and then there's at least 1 or 2 more meetings between now and the full meeting. So we will continue to incorporate this feedback and continue the deliberations with the other stakeholders, including the governor's office. We do have a board meeting in December, and so our plan will be to, I think it's, Ben, you would like us to have a position on a proposal before the UEOC meets in January. So that's our time. That's our time. So so Mayor Ramsey, I would welcome a motion that says that we're not taking a position on the draft before us today, because I think there's what I don't think helps us is saying no to that draft right now, because we've highlighted all the reasons why people have concerns. So rather than take an official position on that, instead a motion to direct staff to keep deliberating based on the different concepts that have come up here and bring back a proposal in December. So that's my request for a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. If I may, that is also my request as the board member representing us in these meetings as well. Our staff is working very hard, and it's a different position to be the elected official representing the elected officials. And I just appreciate knowing where you're coming from. We want to represent how everyone here feels, and everyone's going to feel a little bit differently in our communities, but please know that we are working as hard as we can. All of us collectively, all of you with your input, our staff, Ben's staff, we're all working as hard as we can to get to the right place that is going to leave cities whole and not handicap us as we try to help the state in broad policy decisions that affect the entire state. So,
and I promise, Mayor, I will never bring back another controversial item. Like, we have a bunch of other items. They're all really good. Like everywhere else, we're finding really good agreements. So I promise. Yeah, and I'm getting.
Yes, please. We're going to excuse Ben. Thank you. We have a motion on the table and a second. Is there any additional discussion to this motion? Okay, seeing none, all in favor of approving the motion on the table to direct staff to keep working on this, continue these negotiations and working, taking into account all the comments that have been made, the examples that have been shared, and to bring a policy proposal to this board in December before the UEOC meeting in January. Please say aye.
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 Any opposed?
What's that date on?
Thank you all so much.
December 15th.
Yep.
Yeah, we changed it to Wednesday.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much writing on this discussion today and really being clear about where we as a lead board representing all of the communities in the state stand and what, where we're willing to stand and where we're not. Yeah. So thank you. We'll keep working on it and bring some clarification, some clarity, hopefully in December. And
so you actually, in your board packet, have essentially a counter proposal that is similar to a lot of the discussion here. So I will update that based on the feedback today. Again, that comparison contrast document was that effort to try to highlight where there's overlap and where there's still areas of deliberation. So Mayor Ramsey, I don't think we take a motion on that either, but I appreciate several board members responded via email leading up to this meeting saying they'd shared that comparison contrast document with their staff and with their cities. Please continue to do so. And let's see, I'll send a follow-up email after tomorrow's UEOC 7 meeting, which will have additional info to get your feedback electronically between now and December 15th.
And when that does come, please do weigh in, because we are now in a time crunch. It is time sensitive. If Cameron sends out information and says, please talk with your staff or council, get back to us. That's gonna matter because we really do have to have this proposal ready by December to bring to you. It is gonna go to the UEOC. In whatever form it is, we want it to be a form that we support. But it is gonna go there in January and it is gonna be brought forth as legislation.
Okay, speaking of time crunch, Mayor, we're supposed to end right now.
And
But
really
we
quickly,
do-
I forgot to mention conflict of interest forms still went out. Anyway, if anybody has a conflict of interest, there's a form, let us know. If you don't have one, that's great, you can write that on there, but at the beginning, I forgot to mention the conflict of interest forms. So, okay,
Yeah.
go ahead.
So, speaking of time sensitive, we have a meeting with legislative leadership at 3:30 today on opioids, and we need a motion from the board for that meeting. Roger, be quick.
I always am. State of Utah has been litigating pharmaceutical companies for a number of years. There's a proposal that the state attorney general has semi-negotiated with four pharmaceutical companies. Involves several $billions across the country to be shared with states and counties and local governments. In Utah, the counties have largely mounted their own litigation. This is an attempt to sort of pull everything together. Bear in mind, the settlement proposal is only for money that goes for prospective treatment and drug mitigation programs. It is not mitigation money for past actions associated or costs associated with the opioid problem. It's a very, very limited to this treatment issues and drug awareness programs. There are very few of those programs that are actually done directly by cities. There's some, but very, very few. So this is largely a county and a state issue. The money that's involved is about $151 million that the state settles alone. You kick that up to 270 if you get essentially all the cities and counties to participate. What's being proposed here, and it's got to be done in a hurry, is if we can get all of the cities and the counties to come to an agreement around this proposal, then we can appreciate some element of access to the money. Thanks for putting that, because I can't read it. So what we have right now is the counties of the state are trying to come up with a formula for dividing up their money because they're the primary providers. We really don't have an interest in that. Our main concern is whatever you come up with that are concerns where cities do have an involvement, that they're part of the process. And that's basically that they have the ability to put proposals forward, that they're consulted on how the use of the money is. One thing you need to know, if your counties don't sign off on this, your cities are out of the deal. So there's a real incentive to get the counties to sign on. We were under the impression up until this morning that the counties were much closer to having a final decision. They're not. And that's one of the things we're going to find out at 3:30 today. I'm speeding this along, but let me tell you what the takeaway I need from this is we're going to need to move very, very quick, assuming the counties and the state arrive at some agreement for us to participate. We got to have a sign off on this from all our cities essentially by the end of the year. However that process is in your city, whether it's the mayor can do it, whether it can be done by the city council or whatever, there's a real need to have all our cities involved. Now you can say, well, if I'm not going to get any money, why do I care? Well, because we'll lose $170 million for somebody in the state. And very frankly, politically, we don't want to be viewed as the ones that, hey, we sort of screwed this up. So the long and short of this is what I would like to ask for is a general support that we notify our cities of the importance of participating in this and encourage them to support the settlement when it's final. Cam, that's as quick as I can be.
Yeah, let me add one other piece on the county. So the UAC had their conference last week, and so on Friday, all of the city or county attorneys, county commissioners and council members, and some of their outside counsel met. And it's really the first time this fall that they've all been in the same room together to talk about what you see. Nick, go back up to item number 1 on the allocation piece, because ultimately the counties need to decide if they're going to waive their litigation rights, and all 29 counties are involved in litigation. If they waive their litigation rights and join the state pool, then it gets to these other pieces where the cities would be involved. But because cities over 10,000 are required to participate in order for the state to maximize the settlement, that's where you come in and your cities come in and having to approve this to maximize the settlement. But the county piece is really the first piece that has to fall. They told me this morning that they hope in the next week to week and a half to have an answer back from their counties if they're going to participate. So we were hoping to be able to say to you, here's the county proposal, are we on board with it or not? So we could take that back at 3:30. Now, like Roger said, really what we need from the board today is to say, we're supportive of when we get to step 2, making sure that there's potential opportunities for cities to access dollars. Not every city is going to see any money. It is highly likely that most cities won't see any money. But we still need the cities to sign on to provide the opportunity to maximize the dollars and then make sure that cities have a seat at the table as appropriate around the state. So really that's the direction we need, because by the time this board meets again in December, it's too late. We will have by then needed to circulate all the information, and your councils will needed to act it, or in your case, Mayor Kafusi, your office will need to act in your form of government.
And although that it's cities above 10,000, you also need cities below 10,000
No,
to
just to sign
support.
up. Only cities above 10,000 need to sign up. But if we say the league board is comfortable with this approach, that will help speed this along, because it all has to be done by early December.
We need a motion on this? Or
So
just
first we want to,
general direction?
first, are there any questions for Roger or me? Anybody online?
Make a motion to approve league staff's proposal with respect to our position on the opioid settlement.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to support league staff's recommendation on the direction of the opioid settlement. Any discussion?
A big thank you to Roger and Cam for the hours and hours and months spent on this.
So much time, thank you. You know, it's easy to make a quick motion and give Roger 2 seconds to present on something that really has been a work.
I'm getting very good at this.
Right, are you saying Roger and Kev both need some Percocet?
They both probably need some vacation time. Thank you. If there's no additional discussion, all in favor of approving the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that motion passes.
Perfect,
Thank you
okay.
both.
Thank you.
Yeah, please share the board packet with the letter, and then I'll have you share that spreadsheet. So first, you'll see a draft letter, where basically the highlights of a letter that we intend to send to legislative leadership on behalf of the league board requesting more money for the local match. We talked ARPA funds at our last board meeting. Unfortunately, time got squeezed then as well. Liam has put together a spreadsheet that outlines how the $50 million were allocated. There's a recommendation that's going going to executive appropriations. I had him break it down by county and region. And so within the 50 million, you can see the different projects. Again, we have 445 projects, over $1 billion worth of requests.
Did we have that?
This is not in the packet. This was
No.
just sent to me from Liam this morning.
Yeah.
So you'll send that
Can we get it?
So yeah, we can circulate this. We're waiting for the final word from executive approach. So that you're seeing this before even legislators about how the 50 million broke down. Can you slide over, Nick? I just want to be able to show people, kind of the regional breakdown.
Try.
So what you'll see in the regional breakdown, keep going. There were projects funded within 19 states, or excuse me, 19 counties, but a lot of the big ticket projects all got haircuts because our objective was to try to spread the money around as best as possible, knowing again that there's only $50 million available for over $1 billion worth of projects. Nick, go back to the board packet. So this is the draft letter. We would welcome a motion to finalize the official ask from the league board to expand the local match part 2. We're also asking for ARPA money for homelessness, which you approved in previous board meetings. But basically, any questions on the local match piece, and if not, then we would take that motion so we can get that
My only
letter out
question
this
is,
week.
we're not going to state that any amount that we're asking for it to be?
So there have been multiple numbers that have bounced around. The number that seems to have some coalescing is 100 million.
That's what I've heard.
And so the question, so that we could ask for 100 million, since that's a number that's been bandied around, or we could just leave it broad that we're supportive and work through the appropriations process.
And see if there's any chance we can get that 100 million raised.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Well, they realized that there was $1 billion in ask and 50 million used, so.
Right.
And the question is, will the projects happen with just a smaller amount?
Right.
Right.
Yeah, and unfortunately, one of the lessons we learned, and I say this as a selection committee member, is we didn't ask the question in the application, can you go forward if you only got 50%?
Right.
So we did some arbitrary haircuts, which we discussed as a selection committee, because again, we were trying to spread the money. But if they fund it fully, one option would be to fund those projects, another option is to expand it to other projects and try to gather that additional.
So they're planning to put more money into it, right, aren't they?
Yeah.
So there's general support. There's a lot of support amongst key House members. And so that our goal here is send this letter to the governor's office, House and Senate. So again, we have a unified front saying that this is a immediate need.
Yeah.
It's just the amount that we're not sure of.
We submitted for, we thought we'd be the only ones.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just kidding.
Here's some advocacy. for
Okay,
the Black
can I get a motion to support, sending this letter of support, asking for additional funds to be allocated? All right, we have a motion and a second. Any additional discussion? Okay, all in favor of sending this letter of support, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so at the next board meeting, we'll bring back the UEOC proposal, also a summary of these financial asks that we have made of the legislature, because this is actually more money in general appropriations than we've ever asked for in my career here. Again, we're asking for general appropriations, not specific ones, but it's still a bit of a change for us. So I just want to make sure you're all clear with that, because recognizing your cities will be asking for individual appropriations. Likewise, if your cities are working on bills or potential legislation, let us know so that we make sure we have all of our ducks in a row. And the executive director report will have board vacancies to fill in December. We'll work with Mayor Silvestrini. We'll be starting our interviewing for the deputy director and the other posting hopefully later this month. And then elected officials essentials will be Saturday, December 11th. So please share the word within your regions. That December 11th one is our statewide training. So we will have league staff at USU facilities across the state hosting little regional meetings. And usually we have about 200 people who attend those regional meetings. So that info is on the website and in Friday Facts, but please share the word so we can maximize the attendance there. And then we are proceeding with an in-person local officials day, still working through the logistics at the Capitol. That'll be Wednesday, January 19th.
Awesome. Thank you.
That will be at the Capitol, not at the convention center.
It'll be both. So Capitol in the morning, Salt House for lunch.
So Kim, do you anticipate we call the nominating committee back into session or something like that for those nominations? Is that-
No, actually, we don't need to do that. We can just defer to you based on the deliberation in September. We can also open it back up if we want to take more candidates.
I think we did discuss potential for other candidates for some of these, maybe not all of them, because we didn't know about the election outcomes.
And then the December board meeting will not be on a Monday morning. It'll be on Wednesday, December 15th. It'll be a lunch. So please RSVP so we know if you're going in person. Because if we are coming in person, we likely won't do it here. We'll use a larger facility so people can have lunch. We'll review the league audit and do the updates on these policy pieces.
Okay.
Congratulations to those of you who achieved re-election, or condolences, whatever.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Thank you to all of you for your service, those who have been with us for a long time, those who are continuing on, and those who will not be with us after next month. Thank you all so much for your service to your communities and to the state of Utah, to the regions you represent. It is a great blessing in my life to have the chance to serve with each of you, to work with you, and to learn from you. So thank you to all of you. With that, I will ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay,
Sure,
we are
thanks,
adjourned.
everybody.